In this recording, in the context of Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, we'll be talking about slope of PPF, isovalue line, intensity of production, relative abundance of factors of production, and input possibilities in production. So after this, the meaning of Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, Stolper-Samuelson, Rybczynski theorem, all of that is going to start. So this is an introduction. So I think I ended the last class here, where I said that when you have this kind of the PPF, this kinged PPF. So what do you mean by the slope of the PPF here? That's an opportunity cost of cloth in terms of food. So slope of PPF, you might write somewhere. Slope of PPF is the opportunity cost of cloth in terms of food. In terms of food, and it is not constant. In case of Ricardian model, it was constant opportunity cost, but here it is not constant, right? Here it is not constant. And for example, this is point A, that is to the right of point A it is increasing, and to the left of point A it is decreasing, right? So to the right of point A the slope is increasing, to the left of point A the slope is decreasing. One thing is that. So the opportunity cost, that is to the right of point A, the opportunity cost of cloth is higher when more units of cloth are being produced. So here the opportunity cost of cloth is higher because the slope is higher, and this is that point when relatively more units of cloth are being produced as compared to the units of. So now supposedly that if we don't allow for the fixed unit input requirements, then you may not have this kinged kind of the PPF. You can also have a concave shaped PPF, right? So if we do not allow, please write, if we don't allow for fixed input requirements, mhm, then possibility of input substitution will lead to concave shaped PPF. It will lead to concave shaped PPF, right? So you will have this kind of PPF. Mhm. This is QC out here. This is QF out here, right? So the opportunity cost of cloth is increasing as you're producing more cloth and less food. So the slope of PPF, for example, at this point, it is like this, and at this point, it is like this. So at this point, the slope of PPF is lower. At this point, the slope of PPF is higher. And slope of PPF is telling you the opportunity cost of cloth in terms of food. So as you move from point A to point B, the opportunity cost of cloth is rising because you're producing more cloth and less food, right? So, and And why do you think that the opportunity cost of cloth is rising? Because, I mean, the resources which were used for the food production now, they're being now used for the cloth production, right? So, and more and more resources are being released from the food production. Not every input is going to be efficient enough to produce cloth, right? You can just think of like an example. So there were few laborers who were employed in the food production earlier. Now they are suddenly substituted in or employed in the cloth production. They may not be that efficient, right? Although the resources have been released from the food production to produce more of cloth, but they are not that efficient, right, in the cloth production. Uh, so from the efficiency point of view, um, and what you can say that when you move from point A to B, uh, less and less efficient or suitable inputs are being used for the cloth production, which are released from the food production and they're being used for the cloth production. Uh, and it is better that economy produces both the goods instead of specializing just in one good. Uh, so this is quite possible that you can still use or you can still produce both the goods. You can produce one of the good more than the other good, uh, but it should not be like a complete specialization. Hmm. Maybe an incomplete specialization. So this is one point about the slope of PPF. Similarly, economy is going to produce at the point on PPF where which is going to maximize the value of its production, right? So please write one line. Economy will produce at that point on PPF, which is going to maximize the value of production. Which is going to maximize the value of production, right? So what is going to be the value of production? Let's say V is the value of production. You're producing QC. What is the per unit price of QC? PC. So PCQC is what you are incurring on the cloth production. You're producing QF, per unit price of food is PF. So PFQF is the amount which you are incurring on the production of food, right? So V is equal to PCQC plus PFQF. This is basically telling you an ISO value line, right? This is telling you the ISO value line. So I can write this as, how should I write this? I can write this as PFQF is equal to V minus PCQC. So QF is V upon PF minus PC upon PFQC. PC upon PFQC. Uh, So this is what my ISO value line is. This is what my ISO value line is. Uh, at this line, the value of the output is constant, right? Along this line, value of the output is constant and has a slope minus PC by PF, right? Minus PC by PF. So you have this as your this is QC, this is QF, this is what my concave shaped IC is, and this is the ISO value line. So is this the one which is maximizing my value? No, I can go further. This one. At this particular point, this is the point where ISO value line, this red line, is tangent to the PPF, right? So opportunity cost of food and opportunity cost in terms of food of producing 1 unit of cloth is equal to the relative price of cloth. So this guy, PC by PF, this is nothing but the relative price of cloth. So the slope of ISO value line is giving you the relative price of cloth. Mhm. And the slope of PPF is giving you the opportunity cost of cloth. So the equilibrium is attained where the opportunity cost of cloth is equal to the relative price of cloth. Hmm. Then you have something which is called intensity of production. Intensity of production. Well, intensity of production, how do we define this? So what is ALC? That is how much of labor is being used to produce 1 unit of cloth. That is what ALC is. And what is AKC? How much of capital is being used to produce 1 unit of cloth. ALF, how much of labor is being used to produce 1 unit of food upon this. AKF is what? How much of capital is being used to produce 1 unit of cloth. So ALC upon AKC, if ALC upon AKC, this ratio is less than ALF upon AKF, then you say that food is labor intensive, right? Because um, if you compare the food production to the cloth production, the amount of labor which is required to produce food would be more. Uh, so food is labor intensive. Labor intensive, and cloth is capital intensive. And cloth is capital intensive. You remember um, the example which we took, right? Um, so you had what? ALC upon AKC here. You remember the example which you took? ALC upon AKC. That is one. ALF upon AKF. That is 1 by 3. That is 1 by 3. So in this example, you have cloth is labor intensive and food is capital intensive because uh, relatively here more labor is being used to produce a unit of cloth as compared to here in this case. And here we have just said that ALC upon AKC is less than ALF upon AKF, then food is labor intensive and cloth is capital intensive. One thing is this, to keep these things in head will be useful when we'll be talking about the theorems. Then relative abundance relative abundance of the factors, right? Uh, so how do we go about this? What is relative abundance of the factors? Maybe in my country, I'm endowed with more labor, and in your country, you're endowed with more capital. So I am labor abundant nation, and you guys are capital abundant nation. So if should write if here. So here, if L by K is greater than L star by K star, then wherever star is being used in trade, I mean, it means the foreign country. So in domestic country, relative to capital, there is more labor. So domestic country is labor abundant, while foreign country is capital abundant. Hmm. So domestic country is labor abundant, while foreign country is capital abundant. But we are not talking about the absolute values. We're talking about this ratio. uh, we're talking about this ratio. Uh, the absolute values of L and K can be lower also. But we're talking about this ratio that relative to capital, there is more labor. So this guy is labor abundant. Mm. Uh, and this ratio is more as compared to the ratio in your country, then I'll be termed as labor abundant, and you will be termed as the capital abundant, right? And we will also assume that home is labor intensive or labor abundant, and and the foreign country is capital abundant nation, and cloth is labor intensive while food is capital intensive. Uh, while food is capital intensive, although here we have written something else, but we will be saying it like this. Uh, we'll be saying it like this, that cloth is a labor intensive uh, commodity, and food is a capital intensive commodity. Huh? Okay. And what else? Yeah, one more thing, your input possibilities. These are just few points here and there. Input possibilities in production. Mhm. Input possibilities in production. So you have what? You have AKC here, ALC here. Mhm. So your input requirements. So this is the unit isoquant for cloth. This guy is the unit isoquant for the cloth. So this is telling you what different combinations of labor and capital which can produce 1 unit of cloth. That is what unit isoquant of cloth. So it is, and it is representing the different trade-off between the labor and capital. So for example, here in order to produce 1 unit of cloth, you're using more capital as compared to at this point. So here, this point is also, this combination of labor and capital is also producing 1 unit of cloth, but you're using more labor here as compared to more capital. Huh? So tomorrow we will be now talking about the main things. That is, we'll talk about the different theorems uh, We will first of all define the relative factor demand curves and the SS curve, and we will be defining what the in case if there is a biased expansion of the production possibility frontier, right? Okay, thank you, Vidya.